and we welcome at an ungodly hour of the morning in Vancouver, veteran nationalist, one of the veteran nationalists, Mr. Paul Fromm, and at a not so early but a very late hour, Mr. Jim Saleam, Dr. Jim Saleam, if you will. Paul, you there?
I am here.
Oh, good-o. Now, Paul, I want to dive out of our normal familiar comfort zones and address some very important global topics. The Trump attempted assassination. Have you formulated any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know if it's advancing years or wisdom or gullibility, but I must say I am not persuaded by the torrent of, let's say, alternative stories that I've read on the internet. Like the blood was scarcely dry, and I saw things popping up. Oh, it was a fake. He just reached into it. He dipped down, reached into his pocket, and put some ketchup or stage blood on, and so on. And I've had several people suggest that to me, and I said, well, to what end? I mean, uh, uh, if that's caught, I would say, yeah, there goes credibility completely. You ruin the campaign. On the other hand, if somehow he was in cahoots with the shooter, I know enough about guns. I would not play around with that. You can't play around with somebody's just going to. There will be just that near enough miss to nick your ear and create some blood and so on. I think it's exactly as it seems. He was shot. There was a massive, utter failure of security. Now, at that point, I'd be open to alternative other ideas. Were they just incompetent? That woman Cheadle, who resigned, she was the head of the Secret Service, was when she was grilled by the House committee. I'm not sure which House committee it was, but she was just horrible. She refused to answer almost every question. Her big thing though, and this was before the Trump attempted assassination, was DEI. She was very big on getting more women and non-whites into that. And of course, what comes with DEI is incompetence. If race and sex are the main determinants for a job, you will end if ability and quality are not the main criteria, then you're going to get incompetence. This thing, from what's unraveled, and I've been following some of the hearings and statements, was a Keystone Cop operation. The Secret Service was allegedly under-resourced, so they were relying on some of the local county police in that part of Pennsylvania, in that part of Butler, Pennsylvania. And I know that part of Western Pennsylvania fairly well. And there was no coordination. There was no overview. Now, you might posit that there was perhaps an attempt to deep within the American government to get rid of Trump, because he really, by all accounts, should have been dead. That was a headshot, and it was just that movement to the last moment that meant that the bullet hit the ear. And for those who say, "Oh, well, it's all staged," there's I think there's one person dead and two people seriously injured. Anyway, so my view is, I guess, is relatively conventional. So it's either utter incompetence or maybe even worse. But I do think Trump was shot at.
Well, the rabbit hole runs much deeper than that. I actually authored 2 articles, one on the Trump shooting and one on the shooter. And let's first explain to our viewers what DEI stands for. It stands for didn't earn it.
It says signs for what?
Didn't earn it.
That's right.
Yeah. But that's
diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
that's a comfortable argument that they've posited, because the amount of irregularities surrounding this thing, when you get deeper into it, you find out that the shooter himself actually entered the perimeter, and I believe in a car. We don't know the make of the car or anything, but he entered alongside the Secret Service. We know that he was registered on the registered by the local law enforcement an hour beforehand and earlier in the day, in fact. And I believe that Cheetle, who you might agree has a very apt surname, she's a bit of a fall guy. See, Paul, I believe events are moving so fast in the world at the moment that they've already tried to memory hole that, the Trump shooting. But I posit that it's almost, being polite to not come out and state the fact that it would follow very strongly in step with what happened to John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, etc. That this was just the error was not in the guarding of the security. The error was in the failure to kill Trump. Jim Saleam, what do you think?
Yeah, well, look, I'll just move the discussion for a moment. Paul's raised a very good point, a philosophical one, is that there are many conspiracies that certainly occur, but there's a thing called conspiratology. And conspiratology is making completely false and strange assertions, takes a debate to, I'll just say, weird places. And conspiratologists never get the story right. In fact, they're not interested in getting it right. They live in a shadow world of non-belief, and they're continually stoking the flames of that non-belief. So we had a man in Australia a few years ago called Joe Viles. He's dead now. He wrote a lot of this sort of material about every incident in the world that occurred, and he always knew the absolute facts of it. We had a mass shooting in Australia about 30 years ago that resulted in firearms being taken off people. A lot of silly people handed in their guns. There was a shooter running around the old convict settlement at Port Arthur, and there are all of these people alleging there were 2 gunmen, 3 gunmen, all the rest of it. And I've gone over all the material myself. I believe there was 1 gunman. He had the ability to do this because he was a matoid. And they said that this bloke couldn't do the crime, that it was impossible. But matoids have highly developed intelligence in one single area, and the rest of their mind is depressed to the level of imbecility. The real conspiracy is often the advantage or the disadvantage that is taken by state actors and state forces after a thing is done. And I believe that there was certainly a plan in place amongst Australian politicians. If there ever was a mass shooting, there would then be a mass campaign to take away firearms.
What's that got to do with?
Well, this is what I'm leading to. I'm agreeing with what Paul's saying, that in all probability, the bizarre theories of the Trump case can be entirely dismissed because they live in the world of conspiratology. We have to look for the actual event that took place, and obviously you've documented it.
And you've read it, so I'm surprised you're talking.
That's right. But what I'm saying is it's very clear that a person was involved, but it's the way a person can be facilitated. It's a way that what he's done can be covered up. It's the way that it's then manipulated, and then, as our friend Nate just said, drops down a memory hole when you don't get the result that you wanted. And these are the conspiracies that obviously do operate. There's nothing fantastic about it. It's probably a parastate plot in America using some Manchurian candidate, as has been written, is dredged up to do it. And the United States has got an appalling record of Manchurian candidates. And we know of at least two.
I would like to ask Paul, what is your attitude towards Trump, and how do you feel the implications for Canada would be if a Kamala and her running mate, whose name eludes me but starts with a W, Waltz, whatever. What are your thoughts essentially on Trump?
Well, that's kind of two different questions, Trump and Harris. Trump is not a white nationalist.
No.
Trump is definitely a nationalist. In the American context, which celebrates acceptance of everybody, whereas constitutionally, the United States was a white man's country. Every one of the original 13 states in its state constitution said that a citizen had to be a white person, I think sometimes of good character or whatever. However, the current kind of multiracial United States is one that Trump can live with. And on numerous of his rallies of his, he's had black people and Hispanics up on stage who are enthusiastic supporters. So he's not a white nationalist. I think his gut feelings are probably opposed to the big changes that have occurred in terms of immigration. I do believe, from what he did in his first term and what he clearly is promising in his second term, is there will be a major closure of the border and deportation of as many of the hordes of illegals, running up to over 10 million that are already in the country. Now, that's going to be difficult, but from a white nationalist point of view, as almost all these people are non-white, that's good. I think some of his he's been very clear about DEI, about this insane transgenderism that's being taught in schools, encouraged in schools, and now is popping up in the Olympics, where you've got biological female males competing against women, and naturally beating them. Biological males like this freak from Algeria, who just absolutely staggered its Italian opponent, and the opponent cried uncle after 42 seconds. The opponent, the Italian woman, said she'd never taken such a blow and was not going to risk her life, and I agree with her. So Trump's against all that. Trump's against DEI. So those are on the good side. On the bad side, he's a Zionist, and there's no doubt about it. It's not a conspiracy theory. He says that he's a big supporter of Zionism. Whether or not that he's a big supporter of the overall agenda, which is basically, in my opinion, the Haaretz Israel, or Greater Israel, which would include all of present-day Palestine / Israel, part of Lebanon, Jordan, part of northern Saudi Arabia, probably left something out, but from the river, from the Mediterranean to
the sea, Palestine will be free.
No, that's a different thing. From the river to the sea is the Palestinians' call from.
Sorry, is it the Jews' call? Is it, what's that? What's their ditty?
Well, their overall goal, and that's the goal of Netanyahu and the ultra Zionists, is to gobble up an awful lot more territory, and that would include, of course, Gaza, which is why it's going through ethnic cleansing right now. I don't think Trump goes that far, and I think it may be naive, but he's saying that when he gets in, he will immediately uh, knock some heads together and say, work out a peace. And that might be true. So on the good side, I think he will be very good on immigration and attacking the ideology that's absolutely eating out the entrails of the United States of America. On the bad side is he's pro-Zionist. I think he is also pro-peace in the sense that he does not want to see America sucked into more wars, as it is being right now in the Ukraine, as it is now in the Middle East. They've got this battle fleet that's hovering off the coast of Lebanon with fighters and various other assets. So if either Hezbollah or Iran attacks Israel, the Americans can get in on the defense, which basically sucks them. If this escalates, and it might well do, it sucks them into a war. I think he's a genuine America firster. He doesn't see the U.S. as the world's policeman, which has been the ideology ever since the Second World War of both U.S. parties. The last of the isolationists of any power was Robert Taft, and he lost out to Eisenhower in 52. And since then, both parties have had an internationalist point of view. That's one of the reasons that there is such elite opposition to Trump. And that's why, coming back to your original question, I really do believe it was a genuine assassination attempt. And the nice explanation, it was complete incompetence. The not so nice explanation is it was part of an attempt, as had all the lawfare actions against Trump, trying to jail him, criminalize him, the media, endless media defamations. They desperately do not want him.
Exactly. And it's also fair to point out that Ronald Reagan started out as a isolationist, and yet he had a nest of vipers, coming in after him. The George Bush, all the neoconservatives were cranked up when he was in. And then what happened to him? An assassination attempt on him that didn't succeed. I'm not sure that it really took an assassination attempt to sway Ronald Reagan round to that point of view, but they were his politics. I just mention them as comparable incidents. Now, I'm sorry, Jim, we will wind around, but I want to get away from Trump and get to the urgent discussion for white nationalists. Paul, what's happening in Britain? Have you been following the events?
Yeah, I've been following it, and unfortunately, most of what I've seen is, media. Mainstream media with all its usual editorializing, right up to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and his Jewish wife, might I point out. But anyway,
all right, yeah.
So
he's got a Jewish wife.
So what he's saying, and what the elite is saying, extreme right wing, it will not be tolerated. And you've got many of these pasty white police chief types saying that. In fact, I saw one on 6 hours ago or so, saying you can hide as a keyboard commando, but we'll find you, and it's not just people who are mixing it up in the police who'll be arrested. You'll be arrested for incitement. it almost it almost wants to make you weep. What has become of England? Just a fussy little police state. Orwell, I think, understood some of the really evil tendencies within the British people. 1984, I don't think was written about some hypothetical totalitarian state of the future in some other country. I think he had in mind his own country. He saw things as often artists and geniuses do that takes the rest of us many years to perceive. But what I think is happening at long last, thank God, is coming to pass of Kipling's when the Saxon learns to hate. I think the people were just so outraged at the knife attack on these little children and the killing of 3 of them that they've lost their temper, and thank God for that. I think there's a significant element of finally people are saying enough. And of course, right after it happened, there was the usual media cover-up. The perpetrator was initially identified as somebody from Wales, which technically is true. He came from Wales, but he's no more a Welshman than I am. The salient point was he's the whatever crazed or offspring.
A Rwandan, and they said he was 17 years old, but it's hard to get a picture of the man himself, but he looks a lot older than 17. But do you feel though that the anger of the Britons is a sort of primal chord that has to run the circuit around all of us occupied countries? And that's a question I want to ask you now, Jim, before we go back to Paul. Yeah. Does it run the circuit round?
Yeah, I think it does in different ways, country to country. They're all different in the way they organise and what they do. But the British example, you notice that there's now an amazing mass mobilisation of the usual suspects into the streets with the usual slogans. Refugees are welcome here. Nazis get off the streets. All this rubbish that's sprouted by organisations that often link directly back to the state power. Certainly those groups that are sprouting these slogans are groups that are well known for this. In fact, other left-wing groups too have even exposed them for doing it. There's a lot of confusion amongst the people who've demonstrated too. There's amazing scenes in Northern Ireland where some people have been flying Israeli flags, and that's because the official groups that are talking about Palestine are dominated by Trotskyites and so forth. So you've got people mistakenly thinking that if they support Zionism, they're actually criticising the Islamists and whatnot, which we know is complete rubbish. It's obvious nonsense. In Australia's had an example like this too in some ways, but Australia's one was the civil uprising at Cronulla in 2005. But straight after that, there were very determined political attempts to turn that incident into something that was only about Muslims and Islamism in Australia. And then there were attempts by some forces to try and link those issues to supporting Israel and supporting Zionism and getting behind the Liberal Party here to spend more money on counter-terrorism, as if that would be a good goal. So a lot of this is being misused. I agree with what Nick Griffin had to say, that when you see someone like Tommy Robinson make an appearance in the British case, you know you're being dealt from a very fake pack of cards. And the people, however, are the determinants of events. I don't want to sound like a Maoist, but it's the people who are decisive in this It's what the people on the streets do, what they've done, what they want to do with it. Are they going to be intimidated? Starmer's government handed out heavy jail sentences to a few men today, very heavy jail sentences, far heavier than riots instigated by migrants into Britain. That's how they work. They seek to punish. In Australia recently, there was an attack carried out by an Islamist upon an Assyrian Christian bishop. Australia has a community of these folk, and the bishop was stabbed quite openly on and broadcast, and they rioted. Okay, fair enough. And the police came in and they've been arresting everyone who rioted, person by person by person. But they haven't done that really to the Muslim gangs. They've done it a few times, but by and large, there's no even balance there. It's always whatever the state's agenda is the one that's being pursued. I don't trust the British police. They've got blood on their hands too. It's obvious that country by country around, what we see is the state only doing what the state wants. That's my view.
And
the nationalists, or the uprising, is not coherent. It's emotional, but it's not coherent ideologically. You mentioned Tommy Robinson. Well, he recently got arrested in Canada. He was on a speaking tour, and of course, the state is very much against him. But
can I interject for a minute, because Tommy Robinson does not have a good profile amongst serious nationalists. He's regarded as being a paid agent of Zionism, and he was recently in your country. He was in Canada, and he was arrested very shortly after arriving, and the story his team promoted was that he was so controversial, but in fact it had something, I believe, to do with and I could be really wrong here, but it was something to do with either drugs or a
drugs.
Yeah, it was drugs, was it?
Yeah,
he uses drugs. It's known.
But no, I was trying to agree. Tommy Robinson's a very questionable character. His nationalism is basically anti-Islam, which is okay, but just being anti isn't enough. And he's pro-Zionist, and you were mentioning in some protests in Northern Ireland, flying of the Israeli flags, and I understand that because many of the Muslim, if you call them just Muslim, strong protests for Palestine are often linked to Trotskyists and other white haters, and so a naive nationalist might say, well, if they hate Israel, I'm for Israel. But I think on a previous program we discussed that perhaps the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend. And I'm pro-Palestinian, but it's very difficult to cooperate with the forces you see in the street, because in Canada most are far left. They hate whites, and they make the mistake of saying the Israelis are whites and they're colonizers, so we hate them too. But they're equally again. They hate. They're all for the native Indians. And I heard. I was at the airport yesterday in Toronto at some other ungodly hour, and I was in the lounge, and I heard there's a grouping near me of native Indians, and I heard one female talking that yes, she said at some of these protests that there are people using our, I think she said eagle flag. I don't quite recognize, but anyway, a flag that's important to some groups of Indians as a cape. And she said that they were anti-Israel, but she said that they're not natives, and they're they're using our our symbols, because part of the ideology is that all the so-called oppressed colonized people are pro-Palestinian, and the point she was making, and it's being made by others, is that the Native Canadian leadership is not necessarily anti-Israel. In fact, like many groups, they're fairly selfish, fairly focused on their own desires and goals and so on. But that's part of the mix, and the reality that we've got people who are pro-Palestinian, and many of them are being dominated by the extreme anti-white left. So I kind of understand what those folks in Northern Ireland would do. I mean, I think the three of us are far too wise to get into any of that. At the protests that I was so much involved in, the protests, freedom protests against all the COVID insanity. We did have a few naive people that would have signs like Trudeau equals Hitler, because in the current dialogue, there is no person worse than Adolf Hitler. And so a naive person coming on the scene thinks, how can I express, how horrible these measures are? Well, then it might be just like Nazi Germany. Well, it wasn't like National Socialist Germany, and Trudeau isn't Hitler. And I don't mean to
denigrate either of them.
Exonerate him. Trudeau is a mental lightweight, a failed drama teacher. He loves the dramatic.
Is that what he was? I didn't know that.
He's cunning.
That's worse than being a failed actor that ends up washing dishes on Hollywood Boulevard. That's even worse. Because to concede you can't act, so you have to teach it. Is I'm sorry to interrupt there.
Well, he lasted, I think, one term as a drama teacher. I mean, I lasted 1.5 terms as a teacher of Latin, which was not my main subject. I eventually got into my main subject, which was English. But lasting less than one term as a drama teacher to junior high students, it's not a great achievement.
But I think we can all agree that the riots in England, it's a mistake, and one that I think has been pushed possibly by Zionist interests to try to conflate it with the Muslims. And we also know that elements backed, there's two factions backed by Zionism. One's pro-Islam, one's anti-Islam. So you got, I don't know, I understand that Hope Not Hate had been promoting messages among the Muslims that the big bad whites were going to come out and do terrible things, thus whipping them up into a fury and grabbing weapons, etc. And then those going among the whites saying this, that. It's not a Muslim thing. It's a globalist thing. And the focus must never be taken away from the principal criminals, which are sitting in their parliament, which they now have to acknowledge doesn't service them, and that they cannot change through their puny vote, and that the serfdom of the working class British man has, we could go back, 1,500 years, and we find ourselves at the same place for those people among the elites, So I say, yes, Paul. Yes.
Well, I don't think I've received enough solid information on this. But you're right. The real problem is not the Muslims in Britain. Yes, they're a problem. They shouldn't be there in those numbers. Perhaps they shouldn't be there at all. Neither should the Zionists. But the problem is the globalist political leadership that's allowed this invasion. I saw Nigel Farage interviewed. I think it was something he put out, but he was saying that the hordes coming in by boat from France, they were a few dozen a few years ago. Now it's thousands a month, and the various supposed measures to stop this have been utterly ineffective and lame. They say because I don't think the elite of both parties, Labour and so-called conservative, are serious. They have to change the law, and the law should be: if you land on British soil and without the proper papers and vetting, you go back. It's just a non-starter. You will never be considered a refugee or an immigrant. You go back. You either go back voluntarily, or we'll put you in a detention camp as long as necessary for you to decide to go back, or somebody will take you. You're not getting in that way. No more than I could walk into Russia, and bad things had happened to me. I'd be deported, or if not deported, even worse things. Britain and almost the entire EU, with the exception perhaps of a couple of places like Hungary, Canada, the United States, not serious. I do think, in the American context, I do think Trump is serious, that he's going to secure the border. What worries me about a spontaneous or relatively spontaneous emotional reaction is that these folks may not see the real culprits. The real culprit is not really the person in the mosque down the street. The real culprit are the traitor politicians, most of them white, not all, in certainly the three major parties in the United States, in Britain, the Labour, Conservatives, and Liberal Democrats.
So I'm going to push this over to Jim, but I will also direct it at you. So you've sort of said that it's a failure of the politicians to control immigration under the auspice of globalism. I would suggest that that's deliberate, and in fact, that's what people are waking up to. Jim?
Well, we had a Prime Minister here, John Howard, who campaigned in the election in 2001 about stopping the boats. And some nationalist-minded people said, yes, stop the boats to fly the planes. And the Liberal Party ramped up immigration under Howard and became one of the highest immigration governments that there'd ever been in Australian history. But he ran always as someone guarding the borders, and that's been the Australian mythology. Right now, Australia's immigration went through the roof after the end of the so-called coronavirus emergency. It just exploded. 500,000 came in a single year. That was 2022, 2023. And all this rhetoric about stopping the boats is, in my estimation, a load of propaganda. It always has been. It was something that the Pauline Hanson One Nation Party put out there at one stage about proper processing. But no one's ever said, end it. It's not what the Liberal Party in Australia has ever advocated, certainly not what the One Nation Conservatives and related type organisations have ever advocated. When you see that propaganda about orderly migration, like the Maloney government in Italy, you know that you're being conned. And we see governments now forming, parties now forming, that are arguing this thing about orderly immigration. What does that mean? It means orderly cleansing of the European populations. That's what it means. And stopping the boats is, in that point of view, an irrelevancy, if the idea is to continue the politics and the processes of immigration. And you look at the parties in our country, it's always actually been even more, some people think, oh, it comes from the Social Democrats, the Labor Party. Not really. The Liberal Party have been the architects of mass immigration into Australia. I don't know if you know our Prime Minister Menzies. You've heard of him, Paul? Yeah, well, Menzies was this man. There's some so-called conservative groups now getting around our country talking a bit about immigration, and they put pictures of this man on their chats and on their blog sites and the rest of it, as if he's some really great guy. It was Menzies' group that did away with White Australia in 1966. The coward resigned a month before they changed the policy. He didn't want to have his little hands on it. 10 years later, he came back and made a few noises about immigration, and when he got criticised, he ran away again. Personally, I think that if it had come to him actually signing the doing away of Australia's immigration, traditional immigration policy, he might never have done it. Maybe he wouldn't have, but he never had the courage to fight. But it's always the Liberal Party that does this. They set it up. And now the Labor Party has carried on here with guarding the borders. They have a thing called Operation Sovereign Borders here. So, but getting back to the point, you look at the rate of immigration into Canada, into all of the European countries, France, Germany, etc., and it's very obvious what the ruling class is actually doing. And I think we need to say it quite openly.
Paul,
for our Canadian listeners, I think should be pointed out that the Liberal Party in Australia is what we would call the Conservative Party in Canada. Right. But equally useless.
But less than, mate, they give uselessness a bad name.
Bad name, that's right, they do.
In Canada, until very, very recently, there was very little negative talk about immigration, except from people like us. The polls showed a lot of vast majority of people didn't really like what was going on. They didn't like the changes of their neighborhood. They were not on side with mass immigration, but it had not risen to become a major issue. It has in the past year and a half with the impossible housing situation. We're absolutely overwhelmed, and Trudeau went absolutely bonkers. Not only do we have the highest legal immigration ever, which is at about 500,000 people a year, but the intake, so-called temporary intake of temporary foreign workers who are not all that temporary. Many of them just stay and enter the immigration track, and over 500,000 foreign student visas. Every one of those people, temporary foreign workers, people on student visa, every one of them needs a room to sleep in. The housing is just not there. We would need to build another 3.5 million houses by 2030 just to house the people that's the backlog right now. But we add more people every year, and finally, the people have awakened to make a connection with immigration, even in many mainstream publications and mainstream commentators. That's now okay to observe. And then we have a failing public health care system, overwhelmed, well, for various reasons, but primarily because of mass immigration. And one of my favorite themes, which I've been pushing every time I've run for election, is our traffic gridlock, which is the worst in North America. Not Atlanta, not Los Angeles. Toronto is the worst, and it's all because of mass immigration and the failure to build infrastructure. So finally, my point is finally immigration is politically on the landscape. The conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, many of us suspect is a crypto globalist. He has not really touched immigration until very recently. And his position superficially sounds okay. He says, we will have to limit immigration. We have to balance immigration with housing, which sounds a lot like the position of some so-called conservative parties elsewhere. Okay, that would improve things. And what it would actually mean is a moratorium. I don't know if he knows that or it just sounds good. The only one who I think gets it is the leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier. He came out recently for a moratorium. And my circle have been pushing this for 30 years. But never more important than right now. The only possible solution is a moratorium, because behind or beyond the problems of housing and healthcare and traffic gridlock, what concerns me most is basically the racial replacement. And it seems to me, short term, the only position that would have a chance of flying is a moratorium. That because right now people are not yet ready for the racial argument. We're being replaced, that's wrong, and we must either stop immigration or have immigration that will not upset the ethnic balance. And that's a harder argument to make in the present context. So the easier argument is moratorium. And so the only political leader who is saying that, and I'm quite surprised because Maxime Bernier comes out of a somewhat libertarian tradition, is Maxime Bernier, but that's where we're at. We are being replaced. I am floored at the number of Indians, native. I mean, sorry, from the Indian subcontinent, not our your Aboriginals.
It's actually well understood that a lot of subcontinental Indians, and that was actually going to be my question, which was your problem doesn't seem to be the same. All of us white countries have different demographic floodings. For instance, Europe has to deal with the Middle Eastern and the Arab and African influx. Australia has to deal with the Asian, Indian, Arab, and I would say Chinese more than anything. And yours at the present, as it's understood from Australian perspective, is Indians, isn't it, Paul? And not the Indian.
In Canada, they've got a different name every day. It used to be Indians. Then it was First Nations.
Yeah,
and then it was Aboriginals.
With their bullshit, we won't buy into their vernacular.
But anyway, okay, the Indians that are coming in huge numbers are from the Indian subcontinent, and so they're the number one. Number two are Chinese. Number three are Filipinos, and no white people in the whole lot. It is replacement, and the media is beginning to flap around a lot about these conspiracy theories about replacement. Well, when they're making noises like that, what it tells me is that they see a fair number of people finally beginning to realize, gee, my city doesn't look the way it used to, and there aren't so many of us anymore. We're being replaced. Well, we are. And this, I'm sure it's the same in Australia. It's the same in the United States. It's the same in most countries in Europe and certainly in Canada.
Now, Jim, I want you to, have you got a question for Paul?
Yeah, I do. You've indicated that the opposition to this in Canada, there are many circles. You've referred to your own circle. I received your publications. Why do you think it is that no political party seems to have actually emerged in Canada that has the immigration cause as something very, very close to its core? Is there a reason for that? Or am I wrong that I haven't
Well,
recognized it?
I think the People's Party, which was founded, let me get this straight, in 2017, I think. But anyway, um, it has moved fairly strongly in that direction. It may not have been the initial motivation, but they are taking a pretty strong stand. Well, why? Well, we've had very, very poor leadership in this country. It's difficult to form a federal party because of the legislation. You need quite a bit of startup money, and it's fairly difficult to qualify. And we're a big country, like Australia. To have a credible party, you have to have candidates in most ridings. A regional party isn't going to succeed. So it's been hard to get that critical mass. I was involved in an effort to do that, and we actually got the party registered, and then it was sabotaged internally. I won't go into it, but it never really, got much further. The People's Party has, partly because it was led by a man who almost won the Conservative Party's nomination for leader back around 2015. And so he had a network across the country. And that, I think, gave the party the ability to at least appear credible. That there was not a party in name running 4 candidates, or like 3 candidates as the party I was involved with, and that's laughable. In the country, I think we have 336 federal seats. You run 3 candidates. It's certainly not your time. I think also, until recently, there was very little understanding of the catastrophic effects of massive third world immigration. There were, and there's the leadership element in our country is really pretty deficient. There's no credible national leader or a person who was prepared to lead anything like that until very recently. I blame World War One, but that's maybe another story.
So, getting back to the events in England, they are sending a chain reaction of awakening about the globalism and the replacement, regardless of whether factions are trying to reduce it, say, as it was 10 years ago, to a pro-Zion, anti-Islam paradigm. Do you feel that that might reach Canada, or is Canada, because from talking to you tonight, it sounds like you're not getting a hell of a lot of alternative media. Perhaps you don't search it on social media or whatever, but there's a hell of a lot of information out there. Do you feel that that overriding message might be getting through? The replacement, you can't vote it out. There's no parliamentary answer to it. which I think a lot of these English people are beginning to recognise, because whoever mouths the proper slogans, etc., your Nigel Farages, for instance, or whatever, it always ends up in a cul-de-sac politics. The only conclusion thereafter is that there's a greater plan.
Well, you look at, say, the situation in France and all that recently with the Le Pen movement, and a lot of people around the place who call themselves nationalists, if you like, they sort of thought that things like that are a solution. A lot of people looked at the German scene and looked at the AfD, and of course it's far more complex than that. A lot of these parties that have come along as protest parties or anti-immigration parties, a lot of them have at their core the idea of multiracialism as well. The AfD does. It is true there are a couple of factions in the AfD, and like some parties, they're almost organised to have factions. But the leadership of it is thoroughly multiracialist. It's only about immigration control. Le Pen is about integration. And that's something that's been around for a long time too, her particular model. I know that in the UK there are groups which fudge the issue of integration by simply pushing the anti-Islam message, which takes it then off track, if you like. There's a lot of problems, I think, in any form of political resistance, because a lot of people don't see what the goal must be. And it has to be...
That's why I say that it's becoming apparent to those ordinary folks standing up in England that it's bigger than that, you know.
It is. It's enormous, and I think our friend Nick Griffin is right that whatever the future holds, you have to organise at a community level to reacculturate your own population. And asking your own population to become voting fodder or something like that is not really the answer. The political movements have to ensure that our identities are protected place by place and community by community as the basis of any form of future political change. And he used unlikely models, and I agree with him on this. He went to Ireland and he said go back in time and look at things like the original Sinn Féin or any of these groups, certainly not the current Sinn Féin. It's all about protecting identities, and we have to become better marketeers. There's big debates in Australia at the moment about protecting Australian identity and how to do that. Nationalists have a particular line, but there are other groups, other competitors who wish to create different arguments about Australian identity. So there's a fight in the ranks of the insurgents over the very definition of what an Australian is, and this has become toxic.
That's a question I'd like to ask Paul, if you don't mind yielding here, and that is, what the hell is the Canadian identity? Because isn't it half of it a sort of a French influence and the other half sort of Anglo-American?
Yeah, actually, if I can answer that, that's a very, very good question.
Paul's still here.
Yeah, I know. That's what I wanted to say to Paul. In our discussions,
is Paul still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear. But that's what I was wanting to ask you. What is the Canadian identity? Is it not
the political definition, mate?
I'm sorry, were you going to add to that, or?
No, I was going to say, as an active nationalist, and you're asked the question, what is a Canadian? What do you say?
Well, our identity is European. Canada was founded and settled and developed by Europeans. And I was at a very unusual meeting last week of a group called Diagolon. And I'm not sure I can completely define it, but It's part entertainment, which really outrages the elite. It's nationalist. Some say it's conspiratorial. But what the leader, Jeremy Mackenzie, said was, I thought, really pretty brilliant. He pointed to the flag that we always fly, which is the old red ensign, not the present flag. And he pointed out the elements of that, how Canada was founded by the English, the Scots, the French, the Irish, and then later on developed by other European groups as well. But we are the ones that took a nearly empty country. I hate to sound like a Zionist, but a land without people for a people without land, but an almost empty country, and developed it into the country it is today. The agriculture, the fisheries, the infrastructure, the industry eventually, etc. That was all done by Europeans. Canada, a Canadian has to be European oriented. That's our tradition. It's not multiculturalism. It's not multiracialism. True, small numbers of other races, some Orientals, some blacks, came along later and made some contribution. Yes, but primarily we are a European country. Any other definition means the present definition of as a Canadian is if you place your bum on our soil for 3 years, you're a Canadian. What does it mean? Well, there's nothing to unite people. Which is why the energetic elements in our society are racial. You've got the Jews, of course, with tremendous amount of power and influence pushing their agenda. You've got the growing Muslim groups pushing their agenda, and less aggressively, you've got the Chinese more interested in the business and so on. All of these groups pushing their agenda. For them, Canada is really just a place it's a temporary resting place. In fact, I think somebody compared it to a hotel. So I stay tonight at the Ramada Inn. I guess I'm a Ramada Inn guy, but tomorrow night I'll be somewhere else. It's only those of us of European background that have a commitment. And this fellow Mackenzie said, to the land. And he gave the example of some family from, I assume, Britain, who came to Canada. They landed in Halifax. They immediately got on a train which dumped them off somewhere in rural Manitoba. And they had a plot of land that had been, I believe, a government grant. And they had a wagon that took them from the train station to their land. And the family spent the first winter, a very cold Canadian winter, in a covered wagon, while the father cleared enough land to build a cabin. That would be their house for the next year. And then he had to go out and clear enough land to plant some crops. I mean, there's always been, both in literature and other areas, quite a connection between Canadians and the land. The land. It's in many cases not a very easy country, and we had to wrest a living from that land. Now, somebody who was just bopped in from Bangladesh, they have no concept of that, and so we Canadians are tied to the land, and we've got to say, hey, we're European, as did the Americans up until a couple of generations ago. It was a white man's country. Yes, they had the black element, but the concept that it was up for grabs wasn't there until the Immigration Act of 1967, and it began to develop after that. That come one, come all.
Now, I've got a let's call it a viewer's question for you, Paul. But do you recall going back to 2004 or maybe earlier, meeting an Aussie bloke and going on a drive and sitting in a cafe and having an ice cream with him.
I'm not sure.
Well, you've just answered me. Well, my question. I promised to ask it. It's a friend of ours, Burger.
Yeah, he knows you. Yeah, he's met you.
Yeah,
Actually, what you just said about the understanding of a Canadian describing what Canada is very similar to. In fact, I'd say it's a type of copy
like Australia, isn't
it? Like Australia and Australians. And it's interesting that in our country, you sometimes find that at a time where the European identity has to be rigidly defined and we need to defend it, we get some people who are very attached to, let's just say, the old imperial relationship that Australia had. And they want to run off and redefine Australia as British or Anglo-Saxon or something like that. And I've always argued, and nationalists have always argued, that we inherit the best of all that as a matter of right. We inherit it. But we go on somewhere else by virtue of the very broad nature of the European settlement and the very broad nature of how we develop in our own land. And of course, we don't follow any more than you do any form of Marxian argument that we're completely controlled by our environment. But a lot of our great poets and writers here have always talked about a connection of race and place, and the two things become determinative of what we actually become. And the true Australian is in one way an echo of the true Canadian. And sometimes, of course, our European ancestries are mixed one to the other. In fact, I think you mentioned even your own. And but that's not determinative of being Canadian either, I would say, or it's not determinative of being an Australian. Australian isn't necessarily a bloke who might be part Irish and part German. That doesn't make him Australian. He could be fully Irish or fully German and still be an Australian by attitude and by cultural reference point and so forth. I've always found, after reading your newsletters and bulletins and many things over a very long period of time, that you folk have it right. And there are so many people in our country who don't actually accept who they are. And amongst Europeans right now, that's a catastrophe. I know that as you've probably got in Canada, some European groups have become marginalised from the mainstream of Canadianness. And but that's something under the pressure of immigration and other things I'd suggest to you may indeed break down. And some of the groups that are still maintained through circumstance will melt into the Canadian majority or the white Canadian majority. Is that your view of where it all goes?
Yes. I think in developing a definition of what is a Canadian, we have to start with the insistence that we are a European country, broader than just British. As you were saying about the argument within some of the Australian nationalist movements, broader than that, I would say European, and that has to be non-negotiable. We're not a work in progress, which is the multiculturalist view. So there cannot be special privileges for non-Europeans. Religious tolerance, perhaps, but there's no way Sharia law. There's no way. Recently, one of our scumbag corporations, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I don't know whether you have it in Australia, but they've gone halal. So if you eat your greasy chicken there, it'll be a halal chicken, which for those of us who are kind of animal lovers is an atrocity. The halal, like kosher, is an extremely cruel way to slaughter an animal, and so that type of thing should be absolutely non-negotiable. We're not open to becoming a little bit more a Muslim or a little bit more Jewish, or not that it's on the table, but a little more Buddhist or whatever. We're European. And, you know, if you're here, you better accept that. If you can't, well, go back to whatever place you fled to come here.
I think, like in Australia, the nationalist line on identity has been the major one ever since white Australia was abandoned. Although there were some people who, wanted to take it back in the so-called British direction, but it hasn't really been particularly good for them. But there has been a bit of a revival of that, a very organised one, from a number of thinkers and arguers and so forth. I've always found it amusing because, like, you look at, say, the true United States, not the terrible thing that's arisen there, but true white Americans have always accepted their colonial origins. It's part of who they were. And it wouldn't matter whether the American was Irish or German or whatever he was, he acknowledged the colonial origin, the way the United States, the colonies were originally formed. That's all part of Australian history as far as Australian nationalists are concerned, and it's a very important part of it too. And later on, there are some negative elements of that, like Australia's commitment in the First World War, or things along that line, the terrible crime of nation murder that came into being because we even had that connection, and so on. But that's all part of the overall debate of defining identity and nationality. I think after I had spoken to our British friend Nick, and he was talking about those issues of defending ethnicities, things that are very important and very particular, and whatever. I've realised in Australia's case, it's even more important now than it ever was. And you get this mantra, what's an Australian? What's an Australian? And if someone asked me, I'd say an Australian is obviously a person of European origin. That's point number one. That's the non-negotiable point of being an Australian. And point number two is that we recognise that we are, in fact, Australians. It's also true what you said before, that the time of white Australia, there were a handful of other people who were resident in Australia. And I'm from a country town, and I actually grew up with some of these people who are of Chinese background. And without overdrawing the point, I always remember a conversation with one of these people who said that the idea that any of us would ever raise our hand against the idea of white Australia is ridiculous. The only reason we exist is because of white Australia. And I've actually seen that, heard that with my own ears. Therefore, there was a handful of people who had a civic relationship with us, but it was always only a handful. But the identity had to be what it was until it was criminally abandoned in 1966, as I know you know. I think Canada abandoned 1965, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in several bits. I've been studying that for a book we'll hope to write. There were a couple of changes in the law that were not even debated by Parliament. Gradual loosening of the restrictions in 62, 65, and then finally in 1974, there was a new Immigration Act, which made it crystal clear that the revolution had occurred. But essentially, all three of our countries, in and around 1965, the United States, with the Immigration Act of 65, colossal change, the end of the white Australia in 1966. So it was all at the same time. And Kevin MacDonald's book, A Culture of Critique, is absolutely vital. He points out that behind all three changes, most spectacularly in the United States, was the Jewish lobby. That was so important for them to change the immigration rules. And unfortunately, there were not many strong protectors, because immigration was not a big issue in the United States in 65. In 65, it was all about, the so-called Negro revolt, civil rights, and all that. That's what dominated. In Canada, it was snuck through. And of course, I'm not as knowledgeable about Australia, but the defenders, it took some years, I think, for nationalists in Canada to even recognize what had happened, because the changes at first were quite slow. There wasn't, in 1968, a mass influx of non-whites. Well, actually, we'll have to wait until 1972, and that was more, was dramatic when we got a couple of tens of thousands of Ugandan Asians. And then in the late 70s, from number of Vietnamese so-called boat people. And then by the 80s, then the changes were becoming really obvious. But you have the mainstream press all along the way denying the changes, or saying, we're being enriched, multiculturalism, what a wonderful thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, now,
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I know.
Besides that, but we know this about ourselves, but don't you feel that all of the events are pointing to a globalist final solution? Do you think that this globalist final solution is unstoppable, or do you think that there's an awakening point? And I always like to draw the analogy of the ending of the industrial age, which has not had an official replacement, but I think we know we're living in it. But I feel as if it's a sort of indecisive point between the end of that and the beginning of something else. And the methodology being used by the amorphous global capital to wield the same sort of power it has historically, by using those same strategies, is doomed by evidence of history and how it's failed heretofore. Can I get your thoughts, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I think I do. I think globalism has taken a major hit for a number of reasons over the past few years. For one thing, the Klaus Schwab's wet dream of you shall own nothing and you shall be happy, a great reset. That got, I think, sufficiently exposed by a lot of people, not all from the same point of the political spectrum, that is under considerable attack for that form of globalism. I think a lot of people, again, from various points of the spectrum, realize what a dehumanizing thing globalism has been, and the threats it does pose. For instance, there's a lot of resistance in Canada to this idea of a cashless society, which seems to be one of the goals. So I see I see a broad enough awakening on those issues to let me throw something into the mix that I just saw yesterday, and I'm not sure what to make of it. But Elon Musk is, he's the founder of Tesla.
Yeah.
In many ways, a genius. He's not all that old. He has 12 children by 3 different wives, and he wants to have more children. And he says that it's true. Almost, I won't say almost, all of Europe and Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand are all suffering from a very low birth rate. Low replacement. Replacement is 2.1 children per woman of childbearing age. We are all considerably below. Some of them are more the sadder nations in Europe, like Italy, are at about 1. Given another 100 years, they won't be Italian anymore. So Musk's idea, pro-family. Now he doesn't tie that directly to race. I don't know whether that's not his view or he just doesn't dare, but I still think it's an interesting idea. We groups that are under attack, the white groups, wherever we occur, are in most cases below replacement level.
Well, you're speaking.
I think that idea, I found it interesting.
Well, you're speaking Nick Griffin's argument there. But as to whether Elon is about race or not, I noticed none of his children are black or Asian. To
my knowledge.
One is a transgender, and that is not his doing. But I have to say that man has been, if there is a possibility of preventing the one-party control of America, which would have ramifications everywhere. Its ramifications would greenlight all of the tributary states, and that's what we are underneath the US. And Elon Musk has jammed his foot in the door there, and he's taken control of one of the biggest social media platforms. And understand, one of the areas that the globalists have their control is through the dissemination of information and its portals. Jim, you look eager to say something.
Well, yes, I know that we're reaching the end of our commentary, but I was going to ask Paul. You obviously travel over into the United States and so on. We discussed Trump before, but are there the arrival on the scene of any American organisations that now talk sense? And if so, what do you think the future of these people might be, even in a post-Trump America? Where do you think that will go?
Well, yes, there are, very encouragingly, a fair number of young, racially conscious, thinking people. I don't know if this news has reached Australia, but VDARE, which is run by a good friend of mine, Peter Brimelow, for 25 years, has had to basically stop operation because they've been so heavily harassed by the Negro Attorney General of the state of New York. Anyway, they have gathered around themselves quite a good group of intelligent white nationalists, thinkers, and I see a number of other groups forming in the United States that kind of a change in leadership. So we're not a dying breed, thank heavens. So I do see some hope, and I also think that the Trump trend in American politics could be helpful. Despite all the caveats we've had, if he can wins, and if he can succeed even in considerable deportations and closures of the border, that will help us. It's not the fight, not the total solution.
Well, the trouble is, Trump only has 4 years, and this is why when people naysay that he might win it, I say, well, if he does, they just go to sleep for 4 years and come back. I mean, who the hell is waiting in the wings with the same passion? And anybody cynical about Donald Trump, I've been looking at videos from him from 1988. He has not changed his attitude one bit. This man is not. He is what he purports to be, which is why I believe that the Democrats the Demorats, as I call them. I'll just say it. They attempted to kill him. Oh, you wouldn't put anything past Hillary Clinton. And by the way, you know, the unlikely endorsement of Kamala Harris, who has, like, you know, a splice of a brain cell in her whole, you know, cerebellum. She's Hillary is now courting her because apparently she wants her ridiculous daughter Chelsea to take the plum job of ambassador to England, right? You know, remember The Omen, by the way, which was the basis
Right, okay. Right.
I always
Okay.
think it was Bill, but Bill's like too much of a smiling punch bag to the evil behind the Clintons is definitely Hillary.
You've been reading Macbeth again. Okay.
So just before we go, and we do have to go because Jim needs to get to bed and everything, and you've just woken up, etc. But I have to ask you,
need
Paul,
more coffee, Paul.
what is the? Have you been persecuted much for your outspokenness under the Trudeau regime? Have you been largely left alone? Have you had your bank accounts frozen? Has there been sort of tarantulas turning up in your letterbox, that sort of thing?
Well, funny you should mention banking. I was debanked by the Bank of Montreal, and the Canadian Association for Free Expression was also debanked. That is, they say, we will no longer deal with you. Now, that's very disruptive. First of all, you can't use their credit card anymore. You can't, I had a mortgage with Bank of Montreal, so they wouldn't renew it. That is called, you know, it would take 10 minutes to explain all the problems, but that has caused me a tremendous amount of problems. Then you have to change your bank accounts to another bank and things like that. Of course, the utter arrogance of these people. It was never, I received an unsigned letter. That's business in Canada these days. Nobody ever signs anything. I forget what committee it was. There was a, risk management or something committee. Well, what's that? You know, who's on that? Well, who knows? Anyway, that's caused me a considerable amount of trouble. I heard a good friend of mine with a different bank, and he called me on Friday, and he said, I've been debanked. I got a letter from the bank going, this is a different bank, but unsigned, and it said that because of recent conduct, they will no longer be dealing with him. Well, he is an accountant, and he's a tax accountant. So he has a business. He had various other relationships with the bank. All of that has to be changed and moved to a new bank with a lot of bureaucracy. When he called the branch to find out what recent conduct. See, he's quite outspoken, and this particular bank, like almost all of our 5 big major banks, is a shameless promoter of the LGBTQ XYZ agenda. In Pride Month, which is an abomination, it's homosexual Pride Month. They have ads on their bank machines, a rainbow flying across, and it says forever proud of how you do sex. Okay, and it's just shameless promotion. And he says, you know, I come here for financial reasons. I come here to do business.
I'm fake, you bastards.
I'm not here to be buggered.
Why not?
But he's a fairly persistent guy, so he's made that point a few times. That appears to be his sin. Too outspoken. So he gets debanked. The power and of these banks in Canada and the leadership is beyond rotten. That they're all part of the globalist agenda. And going back to the truckers' freedom protest, the head of a major Canadian bank, and this came out in testimony, and I don't know, it was never named who he was, told the prime minister, you should declare the truckers, people in the truckers' protests terrorists. Because if you do that, we can seize their bank account, not just freeze their bank account, seize it. So protesting against the COVID restrictions could have, in the view of this banker, got you labeled as a terrorist, a person who prepares bombs and assassinates people. And that's the thinking at the top. So my friend is being debanked. So you ask if I've suffered anything, I don't want to moan and groan and complain, but yes, the dark forces find their way to try to mess you up.
Well, they debanked Jim, and I have to say, they debanked AFP and Jim. So that's why I say the circuit runs around. It runs. The current runs the circuit round. I think is the more logical phrasing of that. And Jim, do you have something that my brain?
Well, I think we've covered just about everything, I think, tonight. And thank you.
I always find talking to Paul very, very engaging. I want to do more. So it's almost like we need to do a Netflix series, and this is just like the pilot episode,
Well, if we have 30 seconds more, I agree with you. I think I get really good feedback for these dialogues. They like the variety of opinions, and it's an intelligent discussion and so on. And a lot of people under 40 are getting most of their news not from my favorite newspaper, or even the TV, etc. They're getting it from the social media, and that's where I think we have to be a player. We're not the only voice, of course, but if we are a voice, a lot of people are there, and the elite here are going frantic about another recent poll that shows like a very significant minority of people under 40 either believe that the Holocaust story was exaggerated or that it didn't happen.
It went to Gaza. It went to Gaza.
Hey, what's the bet that the budget for Holocaust films for the next 2 years has been halved? Well, has it gone up or has it been halved?
I think we'll have to have
Swindler's. It's probably bloody gone up, isn't it?
We'll have to have Swindler's List Part 3.